Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to RadioNemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Oh, yeah, you're in the Road Gang, my friends. We'll be talking to Kevin Lindsey and, of course, Eric Arnold, field engineer extraordinaire, and Byron Kelchner, who is the senior national account manager for fleets from Castrol. Of course, Kevin is the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America. Before we get to any of that, we ask people to call 615-292-6366, and that means we're talking to our good friend, Mr. Ten Ring. Good morning to you. Hello.
Hello.
What's happening, man?
You know, when I started driving over the road, I wasn't home to work on the car, so I had to find a shop. Of course, everybody else in the in-laws family had to find somebody else to work on their cars too, because I wasn't there to be their mechanic slave. So I went to was it Manny, Mo, and something, the Pet Boys. And they done me good for several years. There's a guy on YouTube, I don't know if you've seen him, Auto Mechanic Mike. He's up in Michigan. And he'll have somebody come in and bring in a car, and it's like, well, it's kind of clunking a little bit, you know, just kind of check it out. And there's so much rust in the underbody of his car, because it's a Michigan car, that the rear end is literally falling out. He had one the other week where they couldn't figure out where the differential was leaking from, or he said the differential was getting hot. There was so much rust on the differential that the oil was seeping through the rust.
Wow.
You know, I just, the stuff that they put up with in Michigan, because of all of the extra salt and everything that they use up in Michigan, their car rust is just unbelievable.
You know, I never think about that on a regular basis, given where you and I live in the neck of the woods, that, you know, what it means to actually be a Southerner sometimes is, you know, we complain about storms and all that like we were doing yesterday, but good God Almighty, I mean, driving in the Midwest and the Mideast, and the further up you get, man, it's like, you know, you think about the effects of lake effect snow, and you think about the effects of what they have to put down on the roads for people just to make it to work. I mean, you know, the great joke is, what is the worst thing you can do for your car or your F-150? Turn it on. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. I mean, essentially. Real quick, because I got to get to the boys from Castrol and our good friend, Mr. Lindsey. Have you ever had that experience where you got told one thing and then showed back up at the shop and got told another price?
Oh, yeah. And the one thing to always do is say, okay, show me the old part.
Ooh,
Nice.
By the way, and by the way, I do think in regards to maintenance matters, which we'll be talking about here, I do think that being an educated citizen and looking at people and saying, hey, look, if it's going to be more than you're telling me right now, you need to give me a call. Let's make a deal that you will, if you're going to charge me more, you have to let me know you're going to do that before you do that. And I think in many ways, maybe when Kevin and I talk next week or something, we'll talk about how to kind of establish a relationship with both a personal and a fleet mechanic. All right, Ten Ring, I love you. We wanted to get you in here when we saw you called, and I figured you'd be on topic. So Merry Christmas and Happy Bread Day.
All right, buddy. Have a Merry Christmas and a great day to yourself, too.
Thank you, sir. Hey, what do you say? A little music here? We'll set our friends up. Yeah. He is, by the way, the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America. Of course, Kevin Lindsey, who's who I'm talking about. Eric Arnold is a field engineer with Castrol. And Byron Kelchner is the senior national account manager, Fleets. They join us as they oft do. Kevin, always on a Tuesday. These guys make a drop in once a month. Good morning to you, Kevin. Good morning, Eric. And good morning, Byron. If you happen to say it like a Howard Hawks film and all together at once, that's fine too. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jamie.
Really quickly, Kevin, first of all, I always like to catch up. How was your weekend? How was the week in between the last time we talked?
It was a good weekend. I finally made it back home after being gone for almost a week for SuperTech, but had a good weekend. So.
I wanted to tell you guys, actually, I had to end up driving to Ohio rather than flying because there was a piece of equipment in Nashville that I had to pick up. So I did 7 hours to Nashville, 7 hours to Chillicothe, and then turned around and did 14 hours all the way back a day and a half, 2 days later. So it was quite an interesting weekend to arrive on a Saturday morning and go straight to bed. So it has been a day. Eric, good morning to you. How was your weekend?
Good morning. It was fantastic. It was it's birthday week out here. I've got 2 daughters and a wife, birthdays all within the same week. So ate a lot of cake.
Yeah, I was telling Dre I had spice cake yesterday, by the way. My sister made angel hair pasta and meatballs and red sauce and made a spice cake from scratch yesterday. And I would have felt bad about it, except that I was hangry when I walked in and I wasn't when I walked out. And finally, Byron, good morning to you. How you doing, man? How was your weekend?
Doing well. Not too bad. Can't complain. It was a good kind of 2 days worth of rest after, a bunch of long week of work. So it was good.
It's good to have all you guys here, by the way. And Kevin, I thought we'd start with you. I wanted to kind of really quickly get in here. For over 125 years, Castrol's been engineering high-quality engine solutions for demanding industry, whether it's on the road, on the track, or another planet. I love that, by the way, because we consider ourselves the best trucking show in the known universe. Castrol oils are reliable in conditions where oil quality matters. Kevin, where would you like to begin today? Where can we start? What do you think we should dig into with our friends?
Well, actually, Eric and Byron and I had talked about going back over some stuff concerning viscosity. What actually, viscosity is and, different things like that. Just kind of some overviews of some things we've talked about in the past, because it's been several months now, I think, since we talked about, the difference between synthetic and conventional, viscosity differences and things like that. So.
It's interesting, Eric. When I was growing up, watching sports on television, watching the baseball game of the week, watching, Madden and Summerall called football games, there seemed to be a great deal more technical expertise out there. As crazy as it sounds, there still is as much as there ever was. But because there were only, 5 major channels and then cable slowly kind of spilling in, I remember a lot more commercials would get into a lot more technical detail. I remember commercials about thermal viscosity breakdown, people talking about like concepts like that. You don't see as much of that anymore. Now, I think part of that is because, YouTube and a lot of social media stuff and a lot of, what I call niche viewing has access to all of that stuff. But if somebody comes to you, Eric, and they say, tell me about viscosity, tell me exactly, by the way, as a person who actually had an oil change before he left and then had the oil checked after going, 2,000 miles in less than a day and a half. Can you give us kind of an overview, the 30,000-foot view? Can we start there, Eric? Is it possible?
Yeah, absolutely, Terry. You're right. You mentioned something about how the commercials used to educate the consumer a little bit more about what the product was, what was in it, what happened, what it did, and now it seems to be a little bit more of a set it and forget it type product. Oils are so good now, they last so long that a lot of that message doesn't necessarily come out, and it doesn't get to the consumer. They just know they need to take the car in because the light came on, or your rig is on schedule. Heavy duty applications, the users the consumers tend to know more because this is something that's earning their income, right? They're taking care of their asset, and that the technical knowledge is certainly a little bit, I would say, distributed further down on the heavy duty side, just because of that.
It's interesting to me that we touched on this the last time Kevin and I talked, and we kind of touched on this a little bit before as well too, because so many people are being onboarded into the industry right now. I don't know if you guys have been following the news a lot. There's a lot of people out there that a lot of the people who listen to this show, a lot of people that Kevin talks to, that you guys talk to, are getting really aggravated that there are a lot of young men and women who are coming into the industry who think, oh, I just start this thing up and drive it to point B and then drop it off and then turn around and go back. And there is a certain lack of understanding about all of that kind of stuff. But Kevin, if I was just going to ask you point blank, what's viscosity? How would you define it?
Oh, excuse me.
That's okay.
Well, I mean, viscosity really is, when you really stop and think about it, and, Eric, feel free to jump in if I say anything, off the mark here, but it's basically resistance to flow, right? I mean,
Yep.
how much, that's truly what we're talking about, right? Is how well it can flow. So,
Go ahead, Eric. You were going to say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just going to say that's right on. It's basically how well that fluid will flow. If you think about an engine, how well will it flow if you're up in the Northeast or up in the Midwest during winter when you go out in the morning to crank it over the first time, or if you're driving through the desert Southwest in August, it will flow. It will flow differently at these temperatures. But that's what viscosity is. It's a measurement of that resistance to flow.
And I asked that question because we just had Tenry on the phone. We just had a caller talking about all the kind of trials and tribulations it means in regards to driving any sort of equipment above the Mason-Dixon line. For national fleets, and this is a really relevant question, in regards to figuring out a strategy, people are always figuring out fuel strategies out there on the road. How do I maximize, minimize my fuel cost while maximizing my, miles per gallon? All of that kind of groovy stuff. But in regards to, making choices geographically, if you are a regional run company, if you're a company that focuses in one area of the country, does that change in regards to what you're picking and what you're using, as opposed to if you, in fact, are crossing the Mason-Dixon line, crossing the Rockies? I mean, is there a one-size-fits-all here? Because there's a lot of approaches in regards to the industry, in regards to maintenance, as I know Kevin knows, that you just can't be like, well, that's it, you do this one thing. I mean, in regards to managing a fleet and managing the viscosity, the flow of oil, the products you choose, and all of that, how do you go about putting together a strategy for making sure that your fleet is properly equipped for the places it has to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So really kind of what I think is, it depends on what that fleet is doing. So, a lot of the big national fleets, they're going, covering most of all the lower 48. So they need a product that's going to be able to work in all environments, in all different types of areas. So, a lot of times they're picking probably more of a synthetic blend product. So, it's a really an upgraded product. It is I hesitate to say the one size fits all, but it can cover so many different things of what a fleet needs, kind of how they need to operate. So they can do that. But, those fleets are generally got some pretty good maintenance practices. They have a pretty good idea of what they're doing all the time. So they can kind of run with one certain type of product, and extend those drain intervals out. Now, could be completely different if you have a fleet that just, runs out in the, out in West Texas. You're kind of covering kind of a different type of area. And maybe you're not just hauling general freight. Maybe you're hauling, more of a sand or other type of aggregate products. It's a lot dirtier of an environment, kind of working out in those areas. So somebody's probably going to use maybe a higher viscosity product, so maybe more of a 1540 to kind of handle that sustained high temperature, high heat of what those vehicles are going to operate in. And probably, they're going to change their oil out more often than what just a general over-the-road fleet is that's just carrying general freight, like let's just say in a van trailer kind of coast to coast or something like that.
Kevin, let me kind of pitch it back to you here for a second as well, too. I mean, in regards to your meetings with people, in regards to discussing people who are running fleets, not just individual truck drivers, but how do you figure out this strategy? I mean, by the way, that was masterfully done. Thank you for that. But Kevin, how do we kind of how do we kind of figure this out? I mean, how do we talk to people about this strategy and let them know that, going cheap, or, you can't just, you can't just, dump it and run. You can't just put it in there and kind of look the other way. How do you talk to folks about this?
Well, and I think Byron would agree with this as well, but you've got to really get to know, your fleet, your customer. When you're talking about these types of things, you got to understand how they actually run their equipment, where they run their equipment, short hauls, is it longer hauls, is it a lot of stop and go, all these different types of things, the application that they're running in. Because it is so critical nowadays, I mean, it's always has been, but we probably never really dove into it as much as we do nowadays, regardless. But, to me, good customer service starts with understanding your customer, understanding what your customer is wanting and what those expectations are from you. So, I think you've got to look at things like that. And the only real way to do that is, truly get to know, your customers that you're dealing with, that particular fleet, that particular individual, what type of loads they're hauling, are they always hauling, fully loaded, heavy, or, is it a lot of light loads? So, things like that make a huge difference, with the maintenance program. So.
And this can go for either Byron or Eric. Actually, you probably have different answers based on where you kind of sit for this. I know how you guys test stuff. I know about how stuff is kind of figured out before new products are released. But once something really starts rolling out there, once it becomes part of the daily situation, other than simply anecdotal, how do you kind of figure out if stuff is working, and how do you kind of keep up with the overall kind of performance of the product in a widespread way? Look, I mean, there are people who are going to complain. Literally, there are people who win the lottery. 3 out of every 100 people are unhappy after they win the lottery. So we're kind of not making room for that. But how do you kind of do the quality check once the product is out there? How do you know that what Castrol is putting out there is really doing the job, other than people just simply not coming to you and saying anything and continuing to roll? Eric, am I making sense with that question?
You are, Jimmy, and you're asking a very good question, and it's one it's tough to answer, but we do, like you said, with all the testing, and obviously the sales will usually speak to that. If something is not being purchased, there's a reason for it. But while the product is in use, we do, and we spoke about oil analysis in the past. We do a lot of used oil analysis with our customers, large fleets, small fleets, and we monitor that, and we see how it is performing over time, over different fleets. How, what are sort of the common issues that come up, or how well is it performing, and helping the customers make sure that their needs are being met. Just in conversation with them, like Kevin said, making sure that we're protecting their fleet and helping them achieve their objectives. They're not in business to consume engine oil. They're in business to haul freight from A to B.
Byron, and this kind of really pivots to you because, like I said, you are talking directly with fleets. You are talking with these folks, and it becomes a matter of, like any person who is in charge of what you're in charge of is equally good of a listener as you are a talker. So what are you listening for from these folks, and what questions are you asking them? But more importantly, what are you kind of listening for them to say to kind of know that it's working? We always talk about, it's really obvious when something isn't working. We often end up in the thing of we know it. They let us know. How do you know from talking to them? Because sometimes people, a lot of the time, will simply accept what's going on and be like, it's fine, whatever. That's not good enough for Castrol. I know that. So how do you kind of listen to what your customers, what your consumers are saying, and understand, okay, we're on the right track. All we're looking to do is make it better each time we move you forward.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I always kind of start out with is, what are your goals? So, and what I mean by that is, as a fleet, what are their goals in terms of maintenance? What do they want to achieve? And I think it really kind of asks some probing questions that's not necessarily just around, engine oil, but what are their goals as a fleet and maintenance wise? I think those answers can let me know kind of what path we need to kind of go down and what we need to talk about. Kind of with that. I think the other thing too is, and I think you kind of touched on it there, is sometimes customers have a perception that, well, this certain type of failure, whatever that may be, is just common and normal, and that's just what we should accept. And sometimes we really kind of ask those questions as well. Hey, are there any just kind of routine problems or issues that you guys have, whether you think that they're, kind of normal or not? And then sometimes out of that, we can actually find out is, hey, Mr. Customer here, like, that actually isn't normal. Here's a solution that we have and what we've seen and what we've done in order to improve upon that kind of for you, kind of with that. So, it really kind of comes down to what is that customer's goals in terms of maintenance, extending drain intervals, and are the problems that maybe they have that they don't realize that they have, and then coming forward with the solution that Castrol maybe has to offer for that.
I want to kind of pick this up. By the way, thank you. That's kind of where I was hoping to go, because it actually opens the door for what I kind of want to talk to Kevin about, in that talking to customers often is a matter of training customers as well. And Byron has really kind of mentioned that in a subtle way, that you've got to kind of not train your customers to put up with stuff. It's the exact opposite. Training your customers to ask the right question by understanding the products that they have. Kevin, and I wanted to kind of ask you, and we'll talk about this more next week as well, too, along with our continuing HVAC discussion, how do we become a better customer? I'm not telling people to be nice, but I'm simply saying, how do you work with people like Eric and Byron and you to kind of be more informed in what they ask? How do you train the customer up in regards to oil in particular, and this product in particular, to be really informed and understand what they're getting themselves into? Because Byron is talking about needing people and almost demanding it in a gentle, kind way. You need to tell me what the objective is, what the goal is here. I can't help you unless you can articulate who you are. But how do you train that?
Well, in reality, I don't know if train is probably not the word I would use.
I wouldn't use it to the
Maybe
customer.
educate.
I wouldn't use it to the customer. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, yeah, I would use it as, education, right? It sounds a little better, coming out, but you really gotta understand that, nowadays, everything we do nowadays, no matter what business you're in, but especially in trucking, is so data driven. You've really got to look at the data, and I don't mean data off of spreadsheets and this from different sources, but I mean you do have to look at those things. But you got to look at I'll kind of go back to what I was referring to earlier. What type of application is it in? What's it, where are you running? How are you running? What problems are you currently seeing? I mean, you really got to understand the whole scope of an operation to truly understand and suggest, hey, these are things you need to be looking for because of, you're doing X, so you're most likely going to see Y happen, at some point in time. So, what can we do to help alleviate that, right? So,
by the way, it makes perfect sense. I'm going to make you all laugh, by the way. It makes perfect sense. I'm going to make Eric laugh in particular. Both he and Byron have mentioned the fact that we're talking, and you've talked about this all the time, Kevin, that we're dealing with a population of people, a customer base that actually knows of what it speaks, that all of them are not, I'm saying, they're not the general public. For instance, Tennering, who just called on the chat, wrote, viscosity is the measure in time of a flow of a measured volume of liquid through a standard opening. The thinner the liquid, the shorter the time, and the lower the viscosity. By the way, that's a truck driver for Crete and a citizen driver. Wanted to point that out. But that's the kind of people you guys have to work with. So they know of what they speak. So you can't give them you can't give them the typical patter, because it's like, oh no, my friend, you're not going to pull that racket on me.
Not going to pull the wool over Tenring's eyes.
Yeah, not going to pull the wool over Tenring's eyes whatsoever, and that's really important. Oh, by the way, just to give you guys a laugh. Chef Marty, who is a big friend of this show, we have a White House chef who wrote, we talk a lot about viscosity in many oils in cooking for thickness, flow, stasis, and more. There's all kinds of experts listening to Road Gang Radio, guys. But Eric, wow. I wanted you to kind of pick up where Kevin left off, and the idea of like, when you talk to people, because Byron's answered this question and so has Kevin, but how do you kind of, when you're talking to customers? And the other thing I was curious about, is there a difference when an individual owner-operator who may have 2 trucks, 3 trucks, how you figure out strategies for, oil maintenance between that and a fleet of 25 or a genuine bona fide fleet? I mean, is there any difference, or is that a place where one size fits all in regards to strategy?
Not really a one size fits all, but not far off. And what I mean by that is even the mega sized fleets, they don't have a lot of spares sitting around because those are expensive and every penny is monitored, right? So, whether it's an individual owner operator who has his rig and he's hauling freight, or someone with 3 rigs, I think that the conversation is just a little bit different about how and where the maintenance is done, but it's really the same conversation, just scaled up or down, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And by the way, that's one of those things too, because as people begin to make the move, let's just say that you have, you just had to. It's interesting as well too, because you're talking about people often who are going from 3 to 10 and have dreams of 25. So it almost seems like, and that's the final question I have, and this probably goes to Byron as well, because you work with people individually. How do you help your customers expand their fleet? Am I making sense with that question? Because I do think you play a role in that. As somebody that you've been working with who's got 25, 30 trucks says, hey, we're getting ready to make a big move upward. How do you help them ramp up from an oil perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good, fair question and worded well. So I think really what we kind of look to do is we kind of work with the customer. It goes back to those goals. So if they want to kind of ramp up that fleet, let's say they want to go from 5 to 10 or 15, those additional trucks, are they going to be doing the same work as the previous 5 that we had kind of with that? So that's kind of one of the first things. Or are they branching out into maybe just a different part of the industry? Are they going to be hauling a different type of freight? So, if things are going to kind of remain the status quo and add on to what they have, pretty simple answer, right? We're going to keep doing what we've been doing. But we're going to look at, hey, is there a possibility to, extend some drainables out so that way a customer can actually, realize a little bit of savings that way, because they'll be changing oil less. Therefore, we're not purchasing as much. Can they safely do that? Or let's just say, hey, we're going to add another 10 trucks to the fleet, and all of a sudden we're going to start doing, X over here, which is completely different than, the regular van type freight what we're going to be doing. And let's just say maybe they're going to be hauling, sand, to, a concrete plant or something like that. So different set of environment. We're going to look at those trucks a little bit different. But ultimately, customers want to try and simplify things as much as possible, and make sure that they can just, have a maintenance program that works across the fleet as much as possible. So we're going to look at a lot of different things, but we got to keep it simple as much as possible, but that it still also protects the equipment in the end.
By the way, guys, I want you to go to ta-petro.com /heavy-duty-engine-oils /. In other words, go to TA Petro and look up their Castrol heavy-duty engine oils. I can't thank you all enough. By the way, can you believe how fast that went? Look at your clocks, guys. Wow. Well done on all 3 of your parts. Happiest of days when we talk again. We'll dig in more. And by the way, all 3 of you, Byron, Eric, Kevin, thank you for indulging this ignoramus and information that you guys already knew. Thank all 3 of you, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.